Gosh, I'm awestruck with such an amazingly distinguished panel that it's my privilege to moderate and to be here in this incredible space that it has been such a blessing to be a part of this week. And I'd like to sort of add to the applause to Osley Brown and to the mayor and Sarah Reed Harris and her incredible team who have made us feel so comfortable, at ease, at home, and engaged. I think this has been a precious, sacred space. I'm also here because my teacher and guru, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, has been a great admirer of the work that the Center for Living Faiths and Osley and the team have been doing here in Louisville. And so I'm blessed twice over to read a message from him. I would like to convey my best wishes to everyone participating in this year's Festival of Faiths in Louisville, Kentucky. It is appropriate that the organizers, the Center for Interfaith Relations, draw their inspiration from Kentucky's adopted son, Thomas Merton. I was privileged to meet and learn from him. In fact, it was he who first sparked my appreciation of Christianity. 3 years ago, I remember having the opportunity to speak about engaging compassion in conjunction with the same Festival of Faiths. I was also happy to learn that the Louisville mayor, Greg Fisher, and where is he? And an applause for him too. That the mayor had signed a resolution adopting the International Charter for Compassion, making Louisville the largest city in America to take such an action, certainly at that time. I understand that for the 4th year in a row, the Charter for Compassion International has named Louisville its model compassionate city. This is very encouraging. I consider nonviolence to be compassion in action. It is not a mere absence of violence. It is something more positive and more meaningful than that. Some people seem to think that compassion is just a passive emotional response rather than a rational stimulus to action. But to experience genuine compassion is to develop a feeling of closeness to others, as Mahatma Gandhi did, combined with a sense of responsibility for their welfare. His great achievement was to show that through his own example, that nonviolence can be implemented effectively, not only in the political arena, but also in our day-to-day lives. Nonviolent action, when confronted with grave injustice, provocation, and violence, needs a strong will and a determination based on compassion and an awareness of the larger context. In today's interdependent world, since violence inevitably provokes further violence with unpredictable consequences, we need to begin with inner disarmament. The 20th century was a time when many people thought that violence was the way to solve our problems. Although their motivation was often positive and good, the method, the use of force, was wrong, because invariably violence creates more problems than it solves. We should aim instead to create a demilitarized world, a peaceful world based on dialogue. This would be a realistic aspiration for the 21st century. The disturbing emotion that most often gives rise to violence is anger. A wise and experienced American psychologist, Aaron Beck, told me he had concluded that when people were angry, although the object of our anger appears to be completely negative, 90% of that negativity is in fact our own projection. This is an example of how we tend to rely on appearances rather than reality. Neither prayer nor quiet meditation alone will defeat anger. What we do need is to analyze whether anger is of any value. Negative emotions are our enemies. Foremost amongst them is ignorance. In order to see reality, we must look at things objectively with a calm mind. We also need to cultivate warm-heartedness, for this is the basis on which we can make the world a happier, more peaceful place. And the first beneficiaries of such a strengthening of inner values will no doubt be ourselves. The time has come to begin a systemic effort to encourage more among the 7 billion human beings to be kind-hearted, whether they are followers of religion or not. As children, we naturally receive tremendous love and affection from our mothers. We can cultivate this natural seed of affection to become warm-hearted, not only towards our close friends and relatives, but to all sentient beings. We need to remember that instead, as human beings, we are all fundamentally the same. And to be fully inclusive, we need to take a secular approach, secular in the sense that it is used in India to mean an unbiased respect for all religions and faiths, and even the values of those who have none. We can change humanity by changing ourselves as individuals. By cultivating inner values, we can change our own lives and those of our families. This is how we can create a happier and more peaceful world. Today, because the capacity for human destruction is so immense, because the threat to the environment is so great, people are developing a greater understanding of the importance of adopting nonviolence and compassion. I offer my prayers and good wishes for the success of the festival, and my hopes that your discussions on the pathways to nonviolence has been fruitful. I look forward to hearing what practical steps you recommend for putting your conclusions into this effect. I think it's significant that His Holiness has concluded his message with the aspiration that Rausley and Sarah have articulated for this morning's session. How can we take the discourse of the preceding days that has deepened our understanding of the issues and predicaments that we confront in relating and in dealing with violence, and look for concrete ideas that will take forward our aspirations to make them a reality. As a moderator come speaker, I have an extremely challenging task following on the heels of so much eloquence and passion. As a longtime student of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, every time I see him, or he even passes me on a corridor, he'll always whisper, "Practice, practice, practice." And I think that is the great challenge that, well, let me tell you a story. Many years ago, I made a film on an Indian icon called Baba Amte. And Baba Amte was an iconic figure who worked to rehabilitate victims of leprosy. And in a community called Anandvan, he had wrought a miracle with people who were suffering from leprosy, so much that when you went into that community and you went into, say, the cafeteria, we have this sort of awful Indian fashion of if someone is serving you water, you just sort of put your fingers in 3 glasses and carry them together and put them on your table. And we've sort of got comfortable with that. But here were people who had fingers gnarled with leprosy who were doing that. And it was done, it's unimaginable, but it was true that because they were so empowered, and there was a feeling of a completeness that you didn't even notice. So I'd done a film on Baba Amte, and so His Holiness watched it and said, this is the man I want to meet. And so it was a day-long trek to Anandvan. And so Baba Amte and His Holiness went around the community, and he came back, and both men hugged each other and wept. And I have never seen His Holiness before or since then weep like he was howling. And at the end of it he said, Baba, you practice what I can only preach. And as we meet here to reflect on the need and the imperative for interfaith dialogue and a festival of faiths, we do this in the shadow of extremely challenging times, perhaps the most challenging since from the Second World War, where there is such a dramatic, powerful, impelling impetus that we need to generate and create to build these bridges between our faiths. And I celebrate the Festival of Faiths not only for the intellectual engagement and the opportunity that it has provided for that, but the morning sessions, which provide the opportunity and the window to experience the otherness of the other in some ways, that we can then dissolve that otherness and to make that our own. And so I think these are desperate and urgent times where, along with our, the need for presence, the need for stillness, I love the phrase, give content to our faith. That is the challenge of our times. And to give content to our faith in a manner that is truly inclusive, where the otherness of the other can in some ways be diluted. What is happening is circumscribed not merely by issues of faith, but powerful issues of equity, of the military, the agendas of militarization, of the weapons industry, of environment, of the way petroleum prices can be managed, a whole range of complex issues. And we can only begin that process if, even as we pursue our stillness, our intellectual dissolving of the barriers between ourselves and the others, if we can find that impulse to action. And what kind of actions? Louisville is a city of compassion. And I'm not sure that we often understand why compassion is important, not merely because it's something virtuous or something that's good and it will get us a rapid transit system ticket to heaven. I think compassion is also a very practical mechanism, a method of training our minds so that there is a softening of ourselves. Today we know from science and research, work with people like David Goleman and Richie Davidson, that people who have mental problems or who have an exaggerated sense of suffering are obsessed with I, me, mine. And when they're interviewed, those phrases come up very frequently. What does training in compassion do? It actually softens the sense of self so that it can be replaced by a proactive sense of concern for others. And the more that we can do that, the more likely are we to be able to address the crises which, for our, the media's need for sort of quick snapshot phrases and titles, we just sort of we paraphrase these as interfaith issues as the shorthand for that aspiration. And I think that His Holiness's contribution, the Dalai Lama's contribution here, has been to bring to the table a long tradition of the most sophisticated mind training techniques that could be adapted in secular contexts, removed from their particular religious and sociological context, and applied universally, so there can be a softening of that. I think there are also learning. We haven't had a lot of discussion about the Hindu tradition here, which is an ancient tradition, and I think the sort of second largest faith in the world, and its inclusivity. And so His Holiness is an heir to that tradition, the Hindu-Buddhist tradition. And Again, the interfaith, the festival here has resonances of a very important principle there. About 200 years ago, there was an Indian mystic called Shri Ramakrishna, and he was a temple priest. He was considered an avatar. An avatar is an incarnation of God. And he was a temple priest of a Kali temple in the suburbs of Calcutta, in Dakshineshwar. And he, despite the orthodoxy of that time, created a little cottage outside the temple precincts and went in there and lived the life of a Muslim for 3 days, 4 days a week, and engaged in the rituals and practices and diet and clothing of a Muslim. So it wasn't just an intellectual, syncretic understanding in some ways of another tradition, but the actual experience of it and the acknowledgement that there were diverse realities, each of which we had to accept, recognize, and celebrate as our own. And that forms the basis, ultimately, of genuine interfaith or intrafaith. I mean, very often we forget that there is conflict within faiths itself. So it wasn't just Islam, but he did that with Christianity, he did that with Sikhism, and interestingly enough, his principal disciple, Swami Vivekananda, founded the Ramakrishna Mission based on the structures of the Buddhist order. And he had the confidence to say that the Buddha is my Ishta, which means sort of core deity, and Ramakrishna is my master. His Holiness, in keeping up with that tradition, and it's an event that we were privileged to organize with him, and it's one of the most powerful memories that I have. When he got the Nobel Peace Prize, I had the great privilege of being with him in Oslo. And soon after that, he comes out with his check, and we're standing there, and he said, wouldn't it be wonderful if the Pope, the Shankaracharya, other religious leaders, a rabbi, a Sikh, and I could go to Mecca together and pray. This was 1989. And so that was the power and the passion and the depth of his commitment to actually experiencing other realities, the willingness to be open enough, and that willingness to experience and learn from other realities has also led him to embrace science and the conversation and dialogue with science. And so, in a sense, to explain and validate and deepen our understanding of what quantum physics is telling us, when a butterfly flaps its wings in the rainforests of the Amazon, it affects a possible tornado in Bangladesh, is the idea of interdependence. I cannot be happy unless you are happy. And to not only look at that as an intellectual concept, but try and understand what contemporary knowledge is able to reveal and tell us and reassure us that many of our intuitive understanding and insights have a valid intellectual basis based on reason and logic. Similarly, if today quantum physics tells us that not only is reality or our understanding or perception of reality based on the location of the observer, but the very nature of reality is impacted by the presence of an observer. And so the minute you can accept that and begin to engage in that, then the very obsession that we have with our own realities and the convictions that we have of our own, the validity and the value of our own worldviews to everybody else, again, softens. So I think what the inspiration of the philosophy is really teaching us, as His Holiness says, that each one of us has a different mental disposition. And so we need different mental diets. Just like at the human functional level, we all need different diets, depending on the climate, the culture, our body weight, or whatever, what have you. So it is that proactive engaging in the acceptance of alternative realities, that the minute we can accept that, and the unifying principle that Buddhism offers is that we're all human beings and we all want happiness and to avoid suffering. And each one of us needs a mental diet. And I will just conclude with a hymn that was very dear to Mahatma Gandhi, and that was, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam, Sabko Anumati De Bhagavan. And it's very simple. Your name is Ishwar, your name is Allah, your names are many. All of you, each of you, give us equanimity. So, depending on our mental disposition, depending on our backgrounds and perspectives, each of us needs a different mental diet. If we can accept that fundamental principle, that would be an important starting point for not only interfaith dialogue, but the celebration. And that's what I love about this event. It's a festival. It's a celebration of diversity. Because we have long struggled. Very often there are events that happen which talk about tolerance. And tolerance is a very presumptuous, patronizing word. So let us together, in the spirit of Louisville, celebrate diversity and celebrate the mayor who's left for his commitment to the cultivation of compassion that softens our own sense of self, that we may embrace the other. Thank you.